This episode is brought to you by Encore Business Group, Erik Kramer Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Shayne Graham's Extra Points with Ron Walsh airs live Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
I've got a lot of questions for you, Shayne, especially catching up on some of the football items that have gone on. We've got I hate to always center in on kicking problems when we have woes. You on, but you got kicking woes in the Patriots and Broncos game, and I mean that's not on the kickers at all. That's more learning about how you handle that weather. I felt bad for the kickers. They were doing, in my estimation, you would have a much more educated opinion on this, but in my estimation, they were doing a great job trying to deal with those elements because you had the pictures between the beginning and ending of that game. It looked like two different climates and two different times of the year. It was perfectly sunny, green field. My first thought to ask you was, what do you do when you're prepping? Because you're there, you've talked about the preparation that goes into being an NFL kicker, talk about the ball, prepping the ball, working out the field. How do you deal with that? You prepped on a totally different field. That's not even the same field you prepped on if it's covered in snow an hour and a half into the game.
For sure. What I made sure is I always talk about having separate files for situations. I may not have snow to practice in, but I will practice kicking in the snow even in 90-degree weather in July. And the way I do that is by, first off, kicking on natural grass. Second, when I take my alignment steps, I simply take one shoe print closer to my plan, which means if you see me take my steps back and my steps over, like everyone sees kickers do on TV, right? Before I would get in my stance, I would just scoot a little bit closer to the ball, per se. And what that does is it allows me to move a little slower, but because I'm closer, slower doesn't affect my time to the ball. But also it allows me to keep my feet underneath of my body, so I'm not extending and reaching so far. So that allows me to have more of the weight over the axle type feeling.
Okay.
Because if my weight is over my feet instead of my feet extending past or spinning out behind me, it lets me be more balanced, have more friction on the ground, and less slipping. And then I just have to make sure that my swing matches the tempo of a slower approach. So I'm not going to be able to swing as hard. What that means is I can do that in the summer. I can practice that swing tempo, and every now and then during the beginning of the season, I'll make sure I do a few kicks at the end of one practice of the week. But then when it starts getting like November, December, I'll do it a little bit more because you don't know if that game in Cincinnati or Cleveland or Green Bay or Denver is going to be snowy or not. And, when I was in New England, we played a blizzard game in Chicago, and I remember going 3 for 3, and guys were like, how did you? And I was just like, I've practiced this quite a few times, and now I didn't feel afraid of it because I knew everyone else thought this looked like it was so hard that I had nothing to lose. So it was kind of one of those situations.
I've always been impressed by the level of preparation that you talk about, because to me, some of it, you would think it would have to be, the layperson would go, you've got to be in the situation to practice it. But that's not always true. You can't always have that same situation, and the situation isn't always the same. It's always a variation. It's like the snowflakes that were coming down on the field. They're all unique situations that you're having to deal with.
I mean, I could practice that situation in an indoor facility if I had to, because it's more about what you do with your body than what's going on with the elements around you. So you have to be able to control what you're going to do. And for me, like, if you wait for those other elements to be a part of your preparation, you may never get them. And let's just say you're Miami and you're playing Buffalo. What are you going to do? Bring a snow machine in? You just can't do it. So you have to find a way to create the body movement replication that you're trying to produce, so that when you apply it, your brain just immediately goes into a visceral reaction of go versus thinking and hesitating and doubting and all of that.
That makes sense, especially with because watching what happened. Obviously, you mentioned kind of not being able to swing as hard. In those games, you're not going to go out for a 55-yard field goal. They're not even going to try it at that point when it's coming down that hard. Mm-hmm. And even the shorter field goals become harder, but you're basically planning for the situation of, hey, yeah, a 30-yard field goal is going to feel a lot more difficult. It's going to feel more like a 50-yarder or something that's a little bit more complex. But if I don't need the power, why do I practice the power?
And you practice finding what is the power tap you're going to tap into. And for me, whether it's a 25-yarder or a 45-yarder, I'm aiming at one simple spot on the scoreboard or in the stadium, and I'm just trying to kick it to that spot versus thinking I've got to make sure it goes 45 yards. I've probably figured out in pregame what my range is. If the weather has changed, I've done it enough to probably scope that out. That would what a sniper would call doping. Okay, so that data upon a previous entry has allowed me to know, all right, I can make this. I don't need to swing any harder. Just stay within myself and stay in my tempo. And it allows me to not feel afraid of it and just let it go.
That's a great way to condense it and think about it. What do you got, Dan? You're looking at us here.
The way he talks about everything kicking related, do you have a mentor, or is this like stuff you've just amalgamated with all the experience? Like you put this all together? Like, did you figure this out as you were going? Like you said, you had a routine and answer for everything. So I'm actually really curious.
I won't say that I didn't learn some of this stuff from other people. A lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was experience. Some of the things I never, ever had to go through, but I have a file for it in my brain. I was just very detail-oriented, and I knew that as someone who wasn't, overall most physically gifted person, I needed to have certain things in my tool belt, and I wanted to be Batman when it came to my tool belt. So
that's cool. Yeah, we talk about that some. I've talked about that on the shows, and we've talked about it some. How it's often hard because when you do have the physical gifts or the very natural gifts, then it becomes harder to be a mentor and to coach other people, because it's like that's probably one of the reasons Michael Jordan never became a great coach, because it's like, well, do it like I did. Okay, yeah. That's easy to say, but good luck with that. You developed that mindset and skill set, and some of it was very hard work. He worked very hard throughout his career, but a lot of it was natural gifts that other people aren't going to have. So that's what probably made you want to go into kind of the coaching side of it, because you said, hey, I got all these files. I need to share these with somebody else here.
And I think there's a certain temperance that you have to have, and some people have it, some people don't. But I think for me, it was, I had met people at a higher level that had done what I had done, and I didn't feel like I got a ton from them, but yet it was more experience of what they had gone through versus the actual, technique and things like that. So I would absorb everything I heard them talk about. Now, they didn't always have the ability to have gone through everything that I've elapsed over the years, but I think for me, it was when I started coaching college camps, or when I was in college, I started coaching high school kids. I was a counselor at a kicking camp. And I just remember how much I loved, talking about the things I had gone through to try to prepare them for that situation. Now, back then, wasn't a ton, but it was still a good bit, and I was always kind of highly technical and all that. But once I got into the NFL, and then I started mentoring guys and kind of doing that a little bit more, I wanted to be a sponge. So let's just say I was in a camp with John Casey in 2002. John Casey was a guy that played forever in the NFL, and I absorbed everything he told me. And he was really cool about trying to help me out along the way. And it was, great to have such a long-tenured veteran that, wasn't trying to, gatekeep all this information he had. He was sharing it with me, and I could have been the guy that took his job forever. And he was really cool. So I always felt like I never wanted to veer off of that model. And I think the guys that influenced me the most before him never made it to my level, but yet gave me the tools to get me where I went, but getting them from this person and this person and this person kind of conglomerated into having a lot more tools in my belt, and then learning along the way, absorbing what I could absorb, having good special teams coaches that maybe gave me one more little thing I didn't know about, and also working, studying psychology and understanding certain things, kind of applying that to as many of those processes as I could, I think really helped me and gave me the ability to have a 15-year career.
That's such a key to developing as a pro athlete, especially, or as an athlete that's trying to make it to the pros, because you can close yourself off and say, hey, I've always been the top at this. I'm the best. And then at some point you're not the best anymore, unless you're just that one singular person.
There's a term for that.
What's that?
It's called it's peak mentality or growth mentality.
Right.
And you always want to feel like you're at the bottom of the mountain, and you have to have growth. And you have to learn, because if you think you're at the peak, you've got nowhere to go but down from there. So growth mentality is something that I always kind of talk about with guys, and it's always the willingness to learn and adapt and like evolve.
Because especially after you've kind of developed your body and maximized that, the only thing you can expand at that point is your mind. Your mind has unlimited ability of expansion, as you know, and so your body, you can improve your body, and you've talked on the show before about muscle groups and how to develop all that, and you can constantly be toning that and honing that. But the mind is what, they say we only use 10% of our brains or whatever. I don't know, that's a little probably pejorative, but it's true in the sense that we do probably have the most room for expansion, because by high school, college, and if you are lucky enough to make it or might make it to the pros and worked hard enough to make it to the pros, you've already expanded that to near completion. And the strength coaches at the NFL level may get another 10%, but you're working with another 90 mentally or 50 or whatever.
And that's a big focus point for my young guys that I train, because the older guys that I work with, they're already kind of starting to figure it out, that they've somewhat peaked physically. It's the high school kids that they've just gone through or are going through their growth spurts. So they're starting to see the first time they can kick a 50-yarder. They want to know, when are they going to be able to hit a 60-yarder? Coach, how can I get strong enough or good enough? What can I do to get more distance? Like, well, distance is definitely strength, but your body is growing right now. That's going to come. You need to be able to control how much of the effort you put into what your body has, and then understanding your mind. And a lot of young guys, they kind of want to battle around that, because to them it's all about almost like a home run derby. They just want to see who can kick it the farthest. And trying to get guys out of that mindset is a huge, I think, advantage in what I feel I train. And I train how to train those specific muscles and how to train the technique, but also how to not let your situations affect you, how to not let a negative impact on outside of the football world creep into the football world, how to not let a miss continue to keep you rolling downhill, but still try to find a way to keep your confidence at a steady level. All of those things are things that you have to experience through maturity, but through actual experience and going through it. And that's what I feel an advantage of working with me, is that I've actually gone through all of these things. I've made game winners, I've missed game winners, and I've had to get through all of it.
It's the idea that you don't have to experience it to learn it. That's an important part of life. If you can learn it through somebody else, you can get there quicker. So great conversation about that. We're going to be talking more with Shayne. I've got a question for him about maybe a recent Hall of Fame exclusion that he might have some takes on, but it's appropriate that we're talking mental health. and the mental side of football, because that's what a lot of the next two segments are going to be. We're going to have Erik Kramer on for part 2, where we're mostly going to be covering his career part of his story arc, and then go into the post-career stuff probably for the subsequent interviews. But we're also going to have Brett Gray of Sack the Stigma on after that, and talking about mental health and in sports and the mental side of sports. So we're going to come back with Erik Kramer after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Excited to do this next interview here. We had Erik Kramer on for a great interview, and we decided to make it kind of an interview series here because his career and his life has been so rich and dense with different experiences and lessons learned and things that I think other people can learn from. So we're excited to do this. So, Erik, I have 2 notes for you on the way in. One, you don't have to talk to just me this time. We've got the namesake of the show, Shayne Graham, in studio. So that's good for you. You get to talk to me less. And the other thing is, so we celebrate the thing of the day, as you know, and we were kind of fiddling around with how to do this. This is what I'm going to try for the first iteration, because it's National Puzzle Day, Corn Chip Day, and Curmudgeon Day. I am wondering who Erik Kramer played with that would most fit the definition of a curmudgeon.
I'm trying to. Now you got me thinking. I don't know anyone in that category, actually. So let's make it. What was the other 2 choices?
We've got corn chips and puzzles. So do you like puzzles, or do you have a favorite corn chip?
I love puzzles. Yeah, and I'm not a big chip person, but yeah. Let's go with the puzzle one.
It's tough to ask athletes about corn chips, because I had the same thing with Shayne. He doesn't eat a lot of corn chips. He's too clean. He eats too well. So it's like I'm sitting here we were talking about walking tacos and stuff. He's not. He hasn't eaten a corn chip in a long time. So
I'd put myself in that category too, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean that's why you guys got to the level that you did here in your careers, and that's why I never made it past sophomore year of high school here for my football career. So, but I'm excited to talk about your football career here. This is a great one to have Shayne back in studio for, because just to catch the audience up, we did a great interview about kind of your upbringing and how that led to some things later on, and we talked about how your dad kind of pushing you along and trying to create the situation to get you to the pros. First, it was kind of on the baseball side, and then on the football side. But what's interesting to me about your journey, where you kind of started to go to college, is I think a lot of people wouldn't know that you actually weren't at an arc where you actually were going to move on as a quarterback. You started at a different position, and you didn't. And a lot of people know you went to NC State, but you also started at a different school.
Yeah. I went to the local junior college. It was about a couple miles from my house, Pierce Junior College, and it wasn't like I was recruited there. So we ended up being pretty good, and we were, for most of the season. I was there 2 years for most of the, but I only played one, and we were, for most of the year, number 1 in the country. And then from there, I ended up getting offered a few scholarships and took the one that led me to NC State, and never looked back. And that was some of the best years, 2 years actually, two of the best years of my life.
It's always amazing to me that people can switch positions fairly late in their journey, to where you can go all the way through a lot of the testing and a lot of the different experiences that you go through, and switch from safety to quarterback, or quarterback to safety, back to quarterback. Well, there's a ton of different positions. The defense to offensive switch seems like the greatest one to me in some of these positions. You've had quarterbacks that have switched to linebacker, and right. You've had all sorts of different things. But that transition is interesting to me, because you were just trying to, I think for most of your life, you were led on the path of kind of least resistance, of how can we make it further, mainly because of your dad. And so to go to toggle back and forth between those two positions is interesting. And then you become a very successful quarterback, but everybody seemed to miss that at the beginning.
Yeah. I actually, like, through youth football, I was pretty good. And then even in high school, I wasn't bad, but I wasn't great. And my senior year, we just happened to have a guy that was better. And so I had to switch to play safety. And then we ended up going to the championship game, so it wasn't like we were bad. But then, you know, I had to kind of start the process all over again in junior college. And basically learned a lot from my experience at Pierce College. We had a great coach, Jim Fenwick, who's now passed away. But I learned so much about the passing game that I never would have known prior. And so also, this is interesting, that in high school, the head coach, who's now passed away as well, his name was Bob Donovan, and I never knew this, that Bob Donovan had played receiver at San Jose State with another pretty good football coach named Bill Walsh.
Wow.
And so we had some of that, you know, quarterback footwork and some of those things in our, you know, in what we did. And so I always thought that was, and I only learned that about maybe, I don't know, half a dozen years ago.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a heck of a connection as far as coaching trees go there. And I mean, the Bill Walsh coaching tree, you can't even call it a tree anymore. It's a forest at this point in time.
That's a very good way to put that. Yeah.
So, but there's got to be a lot of seeds that are planted. Shayne, I'm curious about, we were talking about position switches. Have there been a lot of kickers that have either switched from another position or switched to another position? That's got to be a tough transition because you're such a specialist. But can you, I'm testing your encyclopedic knowledge here that Dan and I were just touting in the studio, but I'm curious if you can think of something that I won't put you on the spot. You might have to think about it a little bit.
I can tell you Tommy Tupa, if you remember that name.
I do remember that name.
Okay.
Eric probably does.
Yeah.
He did a spectacular job of filling in as the emergency quarterback.
Right. I got a good one for you.
I know that Mike
You're
Vander.
not going to like the team, but I got a good one for you.
Okay.
Hit us.
Okay, Jerry Kramer.
Oh, okay. The Packers, right?
Packers, yeah. He was a kicker, too.
Oh, wow. Was this during the soccer style days or straight on days?
No, straight on.
Okay. Yeah.
George Blanda.
Yep. Well, and back then,
a few.
most of those guys back then were I mean, even Walter Payton was the kicker on his team until he got to the NFL.
I can believe he would be the designated kicker, passer, whatever.
He was and so was Randy Moss. But
Yeah.
I think the more specialized you get, it becomes harder and harder to do that. Now, I do know some guys in college that have played other positions. I know some guys in actually, I had a guy at Michigan State when I was coaching there. He was like our backup punter. Injuries came down to where he was the guy in the game. He actually ended up getting hurt, and he's out for a year. He comes back, tries to kick, turns into a tight end, ends up becoming a starting tight end for Michigan State. And so, it was, Tyler Hunt did a heck of a job, just such a phenomenal athlete with a lot of size, but came to college as a kicker. But at his high school, he was the starting quarterback, linebacker. He was everything. But
pretty good. Had I got pushed into duty, I could have served as our drop kicker.
Okay.
A pretty good drop kicker. I had a max distance of about 45.
Yeah. Actually, I played golf with Doug Flutie. He had a similar thing that he could do.
Yeah. So, anyway.
I know a good kicking coach. If you want to get into that still, Erik, I can put in a word for you. He's sitting about 2 feet from me here.
All right. Well, if worse comes to worse and things kind of turn south, I'll give you a call on that.
I think both of our backs and legs and hips would probably argue against that for both of us.
I would agree with you. Yep. I'm more into working on pitching wedges and 7-irons right
There
now.
you go.
It is amazing. You talked about Shayne, you talked about going into golf afterwards. That's got to be a very smooth transition for a lot of former athletes. There's a reason that you guys all go into golf. You have the complexity, but not necessarily the strain on the body there. So that's, but it's something that you can still kind of drive at and learn and kind of test your athleticism and kind of scratch that sports itch without testing your body so much. Yeah. Still
going to get a little bit of shoulder here, back there, knee here, there. I think for most of us, though, especially for a kicker, okay, is understanding rhythm and tempo. That's kind of a big thing. And I think for anyone else who's just athletic, it's understanding, repeatability and technique and trying to actually fit inside of a stencil and do it the same way, and the challenge of fitting inside that stencil on every swing, and understanding effort and power and knowing when not to do too much and all that. I think we all can kind of relate to that when it comes to certain things.
Definitely, especially the golf side of things. Go ahead, Erik.
Well, I was just going to say that I've learned, I've started taking lessons about, a couple years ago, and it's amazing how your body is actually supposed to work and how the golf club's designed to work with your body, and things that I've never known before, and how much a little information, how far it can actually go. And golf itself, like you said, some people call it a sport. My girlfriend does not. She calls it an activity. And so, but whatever it is, I think it's a great avenue, a path that you can take with you wherever you go. It's a great way to see the country, the state, the world, whatever. And so to me, it's proven to be a good, something to throw yourself into that you can go and travel with as well.
Somehow I'm not surprised that Anna calls that an activity. That doesn't surprise me knowing her here. But we're going to come back here. We're going to take a quick break, and then I want to come back and kind of discuss the NFL part of your career, because it's a very interesting arc with a lot of different teams. There's even some CFL experience. I also am going to throw in a tidbit there because I want to talk nicknames, because Shayne talked about kind of what he viewed himself as that I could view as a nickname for him, and you have a couple nicknames that I found that I want to see how those came about and if those are for real here. So stick with us. We'll come back with Erik Kramer. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Erik Kramer, talking about his career and different aspects of his journey here along the way, because it was a very, obviously people here, locals, associate you with being with the Lions. Bears fans remember that era, but there were a bunch of other teams thrown in. And I'm curious kind of how you see that arc of your career, because I don't think there are some people that end up getting associated with the CFL in some ways. I didn't remember earlier on that had been a stop in your career, but you kind of dabbled in the NFL and then went to the CFL and then came back, which is kind of an unusual storyline there. So I wanted to get your experience with kind of how those transitions worked along the way.
Yeah, so it took place over 13 years. And so initially, year zero, I ended up playing at NC State. In my last year, I was Atlantic Coast Conference Player of the Year. And it went from not getting drafted and trying out with this New Orleans Saints, getting cut, going back to school, thinking I was going to be a coach or who knows what. And then I got a call from a few NFL teams that there was an imminent strike going to happen, and did I want to come play for them? Ended up going to play for the Atlanta Falcons, and we played 3 games. They ended up keeping me after that for that year, so that was 1987. And then I was the last cut on the following training camp, and ended up going to Calgary Stampeders in the CFL. They had 6 games remaining on their schedule. And so played in all those 6 and came back for the next year, and I had a 2-year contract, and we had a live scrimmage, inter-squad scrimmage, before we even played a game, and I ended up blowing out a posterior cruciate ligament on my left knee. So that season was done, and then I ended up calling. I didn't have a way to go back, and so not that I wanted to, and then so I called NFL teams just on thinking, hey, maybe someone will give me a call back, and so the Lions did. Ended up going there and playing for 4 years, and free agency hit, and they didn't offer me a contract, so I ended up going to Chicago and played for the Bears. And then my last year was with the Chargers, but when they were in San Diego. So that was the 13 years in a nutshell that had quite a few twists and turns, ups and downs. Made some great friends over that time, and I think had a pretty good influence on wherever I went.
That's one of my favorite parts of the career part of your journey that I learned from your book. I didn't know this before that, but it just blew my mind that you actually basically cold called a bunch of NFL teams to see if you could get a job. That is one of my favorite parts because of how it turned out, because then that started arguably your two most successful stints in the NFL, because you went with the Lions and then the Bears, which I apologize here, Erik. I was remiss in not mentioning this in the last interview, because we talked about your passing yardage record falling this year to Caleb, but you still have the single season passing touchdowns record. And I uncovered that in my research. So I want to make sure we have that on record here.
Good job on that. So that's true. But you're right. I think, not taking no for an answer is oftentimes the way to go. And I didn't know this until this past off season. Bill Keenest, who was with the Lions as a media relations director, got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so I went back there. Anna went with me. And so there was also Jimmy Ray. Jimmy Ray was the receivers coach with the Atlanta Falcons that 1 year that I was there. So we got to talking, and he's also in the Hall of Fame as an assistant coach. And so we got to talking, and I said, I didn't know you were that Jimmy Ray. So he played quarterback at Michigan State and was on a team coached by Duffy Doherty when black athletes in particular weren't even on what was then white college football teams, much less having a black quarterback, who then went on and they won the Rose Bowl. So while I'm telling him that, he tells me, going all the way back to that strike, he goes, man, when that strike happened, we wanted you bad. That's pretty good to hear from a coach that remembered that all the way back then, which was also the reason I went to Detroit. Because as I found out, only getting reconnected with June Jones, did I find out he was the guy that actually when I called the Lions, he's the guy that said, oh, yeah, let's work him out. So it was June Jones who ended up getting me to the Lions. So it's not always the traditional route, but it sure, in 2 times in my life, it really paid off.
It's a great example for people in general, because there's kind of 2 things there that I take out of that. Which one, you highlighted that that you just want to keep driving, you want to keep going. Shayne talked about it in the first segment. You want to keep growing, you want to have a growth mindset. You kept on going when other people might have been discouraged, and that got you some great opportunities and continued your career a lot further than it would have if you would have just laid back and said, no, I'm done with this. I guess nobody wants me. You kept on that path, but it's also sometimes who you know and how you interact with them too. So you had those past connections that you just dealt with them the way that you would deal with anybody else, but your the history with them, your success with them, your interactions, proving your worth, your talent, those things all contributed in ways that you couldn't have foreseen at the time.
That's probably a good way to put that. And the way I would describe it is I really love the grind of working towards something. I'd never had anything in my thoughts about proving anybody wrong. It was really just the pursuit of something was what it was all about. And as long as there was something out there that I could put my efforts and concentration into, that was everything. And that's what football provided me. Even when I was on the outside looking in, that sometimes you got to make your own chances.
Exactly. And it's a good lesson for everybody here, good lesson learned. Now, I want to end the pro segment here on kind of a lighter note. I was doing some research to make sure I got all the teams right, had all my notes down, and I uncovered 2 nicknames for you over the course of your career. My question, before I give them to you, I'm wondering if you had more than that, or if you're aware of maybe what 2 I've uncovered.
Well, I think I know one of the 2 that you uncovered. So is one of them brass?
Yes, that's the one that I thought you would guess. The other one, I was somewhat aware of that one. The other one gave me a laugh because I'm a fan of the origin of
right.
this. So that was the other one that kind of surprised me, although I did understand it.
So would that be Cosmo?
That would, yes, yeah, because I'm a big Seinfeld fan. And then when I read that, you don't exactly have a Cosmo Kramer vibe. You have an Erik Kramer vibe. You're like his cousin.
Let me tell you the story of how the brass came about, and then the Cosmo one's a shorter version. So when I was in Detroit, we're playing the Indianapolis Colts. This is back when, prior to Peyton Manning, they had, I forget who the quarterback was. It might have been Jeff George. But they still had a fairly good team. I think Eric Dickerson was the running back. And in any event, I was the backup, and Rodney Peete had gotten injured, and then I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, the Colts fumbled the punt, or whatever they call it. The guy punted the ball, and the returner muffed it, and then we recovered it, and I forget what yard line it was on. But it was roughly let's say 35, 40-yard line going in. And so we run a few plays, and then it's like a 3rd and 1, and we had 2 running plays. We had a draw to Barry and a off-tackle slant. And the play was called to Barry. And so I get up and I look out there, and Willie Green, he's got press coverage on him. And so we had a little signal, and so Willie actually gave it to me for a fade stop. And so I forget what yard line we're on, probably about the 10 or 12-yard line, and threw it for a touchdown. And so come running off the field, and Jerry Wampler, who was the line coach, he's like got his hands on his knees, kind of looking up but laughing at the same time. And I said, "What?" And he goes, "A 3rd down, and you take the ball out of Barry Sanders' hands and throw a pass." He goes, "You could have been buying your own ticket home after this game." So we get over to the sideline and over the bench, and I told Willie, I said, "Was that 3rd down?" And so the brass nickname came after the game when we go to get on the bus, and all the linemen were sitting in the back, and Ken Dallafor, who played offensive guard, he shouts out, "Hey, brass, come on back here." And so that's how that came into being. And so that was pretty good. I've got some good Ken Dallafor stories, but Cosmo was a nickname given to me in Chicago by then ticket manager George McCaskey, and who was apparently also a fan of the Friends TV show. And so because Kramer that was my name, certainly I didn't look anything like the character, but that was his little inside joke with me about who, maybe just because I have the name. he used to call me Cosmo. So that was that.
There's an episode of Seinfeld where they run into the Bizarro versions of themselves, and you would be closer to the Bizarro Cosmo Kramer, because he's a lot more intellectual, and he's kinder than
Sure.
Kramer, and so that's what I envision is you're kind of the Bizarro. Your last name's still Kramer, so you're the Bizarro Kramer, but in a good way.
I love it. That's great. So yeah, we certainly had some fun times. I'll share one if we have time. Do we have time for me to show you one story about Ken Delafour?
Definitely, go for it.
Okay, so Ken Delafour was kind of the Conrad Dobler. Do you remember that name?
I recognize the name, yes.
So Conrad Dobler was a very dirty offensive lineman. He had a reputation for being a dirty player. So Ken was not the most gifted athletically. So he had no problem if he couldn't block you traditionally, he'd leg whip you, or he'd, whatever he took to get the job done. And so we're walking off the field after one game, and we're just like on the way to the locker room. And as I'm talking, he interrupts me. He says, "Hey, if you're going to walk off the field with me, you better buckle up." like trouble's coming between now and the time we get off the field. So what a great guy he is, though. And so anyway, yeah, we certainly shared some good times.
It sounds like we could do a whole interview on stories of him here. I've got him pulled up on my computer. I didn't realize he double dipped here. He played for both professional Michigan teams. He played for the Panthers and the Lions here.
And the Chargers. So that's how he was telling me how he came to the Lions. Was Jerry Wampler he was at some point coaching an offensive line with the Chargers, and back then they had something called Plan B. It was kind of the first swipe at free agency, and so Plan B players were those that were left unprotected. So Ken was put on that Plan B list, and Jerry Wampler calls me and says, "Hey, please come to Detroit because we need guys like you that know how to teach other that just by example, other guys are going to learn how it doesn't matter how you get the job done, get it done." So that was how Ken came to Detroit from the Chargers, and I remember that Dan Fouts used to do broadcast-wise some of our games. And so I remember going to, a few of us would hang out and go have breakfast and, with Dan the day before the game or something after the walkthrough. And so, yeah, Ken's a very good guy.
I'd like to talk more about him maybe in a subsequent interview, but we've got a couple more parts to this interview to do. We're going to cover your post-career. I think it'll probably be in two parts here because of how dense it is, but we're looking forward to getting you back for that. We'll get in touch with you about that, but make sure to tell people where they can kind of follow you, tell them about the book and the podcast in the meantime if they want to catch up on some of the great tidbits that you've given us in this interview.
Okay, great. So I've got a website. It's erikkramer12.com. And then also the book that I co-wrote is called The Ultimate Comeback. It's on Amazon. I'd say within a couple of weeks, I'm going to put up the audio version of that as well. And then the podcast is called The Quarterback and the Con Artist. So during my recovery from a traumatic brain injury, I was taken advantage of by a woman, and financially, and abused by the court systems as well. And so I think it's an interesting look back, a captivating look back at some of went into that time period.
It's great stuff, but the book and the podcast, I've consumed both. They're both a wealth of information, and it'll help you understand the conversations that we're about to have with Erik, because they'll be very informational and inspirational as well. So we appreciate you joining the show, Erik, and we look forward to having you back on to continue the discussion here soon.
Very good. I appreciate your time as always, and well, I would say go Bears, but there's no game coming up for them, but there is an off season. So hopefully things, improve on the other side of the ball this offseason.
Exactly. We'll be tracking the Bears and the Lions alike here in the offseason. But, yeah, we'll talk to you soon and maybe talk about some of the offseason goals here of both those teams. So appreciate you joining the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks, Erik.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Him joining the show, and now we're going to kind of stay in the mental health space here. We're going to move to Brett Gray. He runs an organization called Sack the Stigma. Their goal is to destigmatize the mental health part of sports, specifically saying, hey, it's okay to say you're not okay. And so we're going to bring him on. He's also associated with Michigan, the University of Michigan here, the Wolverines. So we'll bring him on, talk a little Wolverines, and talk Sack the Stigma. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. We're continuing the football-related mental health discussion here with Brett Gray of Sack the Stigma. He's connected to the University of Michigan, does a lot of work with them, but does a lot of work with colleges and athletes around the country to help destigmatize mental health in sports. So we always enjoy talking to him because he's got a great message and a great cause. And so we're happy to have you on the show, Brett. I've been trying to figure out what the thing of the day is, because we usually ask people that. And Erik Kramer was on before you, and he vetoed curmudgeon and corn chips. So then we went to puzzles. So I don't really, unless you do puzzles, I don't really have much for you there. But I would like to talk to you about the gratitude campaign that Sack the Stigma is doing, because like I said, there's a lot of good work that this organization is doing, and I saw that you recently launched that. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. Our gratitude campaign launched right around the time of Thanksgiving. We really, when Sack the Stigma puts together these different campaigns, we, as a team, put our heads together and just think about different themes that, we feel will resonate with people, whether that be athletes, staff members, or even just, for lack of a better term, regular people, because at the end of the day, in order to effectively destigmatize mental health and raise proper awareness, we need to try to reach as many people as possible. And so we came, especially with the timing around Thanksgiving, we came up with the idea of doing a gratitude campaign, and how, expressing gratitude is a mental health practice in its own, and also is a way to show appreciation and love for other people and make them feel appreciated. And so we put together a gratitude campaign. We worked with, I want to say, around 10 or 12 Michigan athletes, had them come in and do a video campaign. We had one compilation video asset that did really well on socials, basically introducing the theme of the campaign and including some responses from several of those participants. And then we had a number of social media posts that followed, where for each participant in the campaign, they had their own dedicated post, just talking about how gratitude helps them both as, an individual, an athlete, sibling, child, whatever that might look like in their life, and also how it comes into play in their sport as well. We worked primarily with football and basketball on this project. It was football, men's basketball, women's basketball, but gratitude we heard a lot of responses that, being grateful and even practicing that in the moment while you're on the field or on the court is something that helps these, high-performing athletes get through tough times as well.
I really like your organization because it does highlight, I went through this in my intelligence career to a degree, because there's certain fields that you're in, especially for the men's side of things, that you don't feel like you necessarily can admit to certain things, admit to feeling a certain way, admit to a mental, not necessarily a breakdown, but something going on mentally. That's a hard thing to admit for a lot of people, especially guys. But it shouldn't be. It should be easier to do, and you should be able to voice it. That's kind of the message that Erik Kramer has, because he always talks about finding people in your network that you can voice these things to, that you're comfortable with, because everybody has doubts themselves. Everybody has insecurities. Everybody has things that bother them. But if you leave them inside your own head, they have a tendency to fester. But if you can get them out and then bounce them off of somebody, then that person can say, hey, no, you're doing fine. You just got to keep on pace, keep on track, and then they can help you, check in on you. But you can't do anything with that if you don't voice it. And obviously, given Erik's background, that's important to him because he didn't really voice it for a while, and then now he's an advocate in that space, as are you here.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on. And, I think that it's the fact that stigma exists and is still preventing people from acknowledging that they may be struggling or seeking help when they need to. And seeking help doesn't necessarily need to mean, going to therapy. It means it's different for everybody. And seeking help could be as simple as talking to, loved ones, friends, family, whatever that might be, and just really just taking care of yourself. But, the reason, the fact that stigma exists is that's what our job is really to try to keep breaking that down and create a world where people don't view that as a weakness, but more so something that, they are willing to kind of take the lead on and improve themselves. And that's also really why we work with student athletes, and why we're so lucky to work with student athletes, not just student athletes, professional athletes and as well. But, athletes, as you all know, it's, they have tremendous influence. There's, sports is a massive thing where, people take Michigan football, for example. It's every Saturday. There's millions of people tuning in and watching these guys, but viewing them really as athletes and hoping that they win a game and score and, get some yards and score some touchdowns. But at the end of the day, it's like the fact that they have this influence and people care about what they do and what they say. And, every last thing that they do, it's, to us provides an opportunity for, when they speak up and they talk about how real this stuff is and how these are things that they deal with as well, we see the effect that has and how other people, it's like if I were to get in front of the camera and tell somebody, talk about mental health, I don't think it would have nearly the same impact as it would when you have, the star players on these different teams. And so that's why we're so grateful to work with, a lot of these different athletes and just really leverage the influence that they have to try to make a positive impact.
I've been around quite a few guys over the years, and I've recently actually lost a couple of those to mental health. And I think when we finally see someone step out and say something, for those of us that understand it and have been through it, I think we see it as such a relief off our shoulders and like a breath of fresh air that someone finally feels like it's okay to feel like we say the word admit, but it's not an admission. I mean, it's a feeling, right? Like you have your feelings and you have what you're going through. I think when you say admission, that sometimes gives it a negative connotation, but knowing that someone can speak and reach out for help is stronger than most people could ever imagine, because you're taking one of your most vulnerable weaknesses and you're fighting against it, and you are accepting the challenge of, I know that I could be judged, I know that I could be looked at in a certain way, but if I don't do this, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to really focus on is the strength it takes to do something actually builds your courage and gives you so much more, because then you see that you're making a difference for other people as well, and they don't have to feel like they're in the dark and they're doing this alone. And I think sometimes when people go through similar things, there's a bonding that can happen. And I think it can happen in a world where you might not even meet that person, but you just hear about them. And I think that's a very strong thing.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And, like you're saying, it's like those are all the principles and just like the guidelines as to why we do what we do. It's not about working with, these people who people care about. It's like, that's not so I can go tell my friends and family, we had so-and-so in this campaign. It's more so that, somebody out there or multiple people out there, and even if it's one person, that means that, we did our job. But it's, there's people out there who, again, they'll listen because those are people that they care about. And so, when you have somebody that you idolize when they have a helmet on telling you that they go through similar things that you do, and this is how they take care of themselves. And, maybe somebody at home is terrified of the idea of speaking up and telling somebody about it, or terrified of the concept of checking in for therapy or whatever that might look like for them. It's, when you have somebody that you truly care about and value their opinion, telling you that it's okay to do that, that's where we see, the big ripple effect occur.
Well said, guys. Yeah, it's a good conversation to have. We're going to continue to have it on the show, and we'll have Brett on the show again. But want to make sure to direct people to the various social media and places they can help the cause and see the great stuff that you guys are doing. Yeah,
absolutely. We on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. It's at Sack the Stigma, SACKTHESTIGMA, and it's sackthestigma.com. And so, you'll see a lot of the content that we put together. And then on the website, we've got a full merchandise collection that's available for purchase, some of that being licensed University of Michigan gear, some of it just being more neutral colors and, applicable to everybody, Michigan fan or not. But, we really appreciate everybody's support, and merchandise really serves as an awareness tool as well, where, every time I'm wearing Sack the Stigma gear, I've got people asking me, what is that? What does that even mean? And that's really why we're doing it, is just to create these conversations and lead through impact through there.
Be sure to check him out. It's a great cause, and we'll be talking to him more. But appreciate you joining the show, Brett, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me.
No problem. Thanks, Brett. Talk to you soon. Thanks to Brett Gray. Appreciate him coming on. Good discussion about mental health. As both him and Shayne were saying, it's a conversation that needs to be had, and being able to talk about it is a show of strength, not weakness, because these are all strong individuals, and that proves that they're strong. It doesn't disprove it. So it's a good conversation. We're going to continue the conversation here with Shayne in studio. We got a couple topics for him. I want to talk about his former coach that was in the news again this week for the Hall of Fame voting and the way that went, and I'm sure we'll get into a few other things here too. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a Twist, Jethro FM, 1530 AM, WYGR, Wyoming, Grand Rapids, 94.9 FM, Grand Rapids, 99.5 FM, Lowell, and Jethro South, 980 AM, WAKV Otsego, Plainwell, 98.9 FM, Otsego, and 105.1 FM, Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Coming back here in studio with Shayne. We're going to bring on Erik Schlitt for the next segment here, but wanted to talk to Shayne in studio because I know this is kind of like a hot topic, but the reason that I want to bring it up with you, Shayne, is because you had experience with this person, and I think there's nuance to this conversation too, because we've talked about this in other conversations, that things get boiled down too much to just be talking points on radio, and that's not how our show goes, and that's not how Jethro's lineup goes. But I am curious on your takes on the whole Bill Belichick thing, not getting into the Hall of Fame. You had personal experience with him. His resume speaks for itself. I mean, I think there's every reason to put him in, but I'm curious kind of how you see this. And then I have a couple of theories that I've read that I want to kind of run past you, depending on kind of how you see it as well.
I mean, I think if you look at purely his winning, it is what it is. Like, how do you bypass the guy that is just truly a legend while he was still coaching? From finding loopholes in the rules on special teams to block kicks to do, crazy little substitution things that just created like a whole rule need to be made because he figured it out. You put the guy in, and you look like a joke for not doing it. Now, do they say because of the video gate and the deflate gate, do they say that those are taints? Okay, let's look at some of the other guys that got in and tell me there's not something for everybody. I think there's just a couple bitter voters, or maybe they don't like the way things have gone in this last year with, UNC, the girlfriend, all that stuff, whatever. but you can't argue with what the guy has done in his tenure in the NFL.
I agree completely, and you kind of hit on you hit on two of the three issues that I kind of see as, I agree with you. I don't think there's any reason not to put them in, because it's kind of the one argument with the Spygate and Deflategate and the various gates, why we call everything gate based on what the Watergate Hotel back in the day is funny to me, but the various things that happened over the course of his career, it's almost like Barry Bonds on the MLB side. Okay, so you take steroids away from Barry Bonds, he's still making the Hall of Fame. He's stealing more bases. He's still hitting enough home runs to make it in. It's the same here. How many wins did that create for Bill Belichick? In actuality, he still had Tom Brady. He still had all you great players playing for him, and he still had great coaches and a great ability to legally manipulate the game, as you highlighted. I want to point out legally, because they're looking at the different things. And I mean, you know this better than anybody, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, Shayne, so I'll say it. He wasn't the only one doing those kinds of things. You know, I mean, that it's kind of like when you talk about recruiting in college football and, oh, well, this team's doing that. Okay, a lot of them are doing it. It's just who's getting caught and how those dynamics work. I do think that the fact that he's still actively coaching and the way that that's going could have influenced voters. It shouldn't, because that doesn't affect his resume. It's still
it's the NFL Hall of Fame.
Exactly.
It's not the College Football Hall of Fame.
And even if he went to college football and lost every game, and it doesn't matter. It still just adds to his resume. I don't think it subtracts in any way. The third, so I actually saw one of the writers that did decide to not put him in. I saw, this is an interesting theory that I hadn't thought of before I saw this. He actually explained why he didn't do it. It wasn't for either of those two reasons. It was because he feels that there's a backlog of players that have not gone in, that we're now kind of usurping through the process, because there's a lot of guys that are going to be coming on and saying, okay, well, if we have this big backlog, we need to focus on them. I know Bill Belichick's going to get in eventually. No, he wasn't a first ballot, but I know he's going to make it in. So he mentioned how he didn't vote for Belichick or Kraft, and it had nothing to do with those scandals in his estimation. It had to do with the fact that he basically allocated all of his votes to players that he feels are being overlooked. And that was at least something of substance. It was at least something like, okay, it wasn't holding anything against anybody. It was saying, hey, I know they're going to make it in. He probably assumed he was still going to make the 80%. That's probably, I don't think he said that in the explanation that I saw, but he probably still assumed, oh, he's going to get enough votes, so I'll allocate all my votes to these other guys here.
And that makes a lot of sense. I had not read deeply enough to see that, but I do think that makes sense. I feel like I've seen situations like that happen quite a bit, where you say, well, this person's going to make it, so let me get these people that deserve it and haven't made it yet. That completely makes sense, but I think it's still just a bad look. I think the fact that the Hall of Fame actually issued a statement about certain things kind of shows like even they feel a little shamed by it. I've heard rumors. I don't know if this is true or not, because you don't never know what's true or not on the internet, but that Belichick has said, make me ineligible. I don't want to be in it. And because he did that, he's now asking for all of the memorabilia that he has in there, including like a game plan book, some other stuff. Supposedly he can get that back because he's not eligible for it anymore. I don't know if that's truth or not. It could be just one of those random Instagram reels that spits a bunch of BS at you. But I think, to Belichick, I think he truly doesn't care. I don't know if he's given a statement or not. No idea. But I think if he's going to go in, like he's going to go in. I just don't know that he truly has that much of an interest in knowing that he had to be a first ballot. But when you look at his numbers compared to other people who've gone in, it's like, how do you not put him in?
Exactly. And I mean, that is very much of Belichick's character to say, like you said after the one Super Bowl, I forget which team it was. Well, we're on to Cleveland after this. Well, no, you're not on to anybody, coach. You just won. You got to wait till next season. Yeah. But that's the way his mindset is. He's not concerned about the accolades. He's I mean, that's why he's still, you can say what you want about the girlfriend or what's going on at North Carolina. He wanted to be in the game still. He wanted to be associated with the game. He wanted to still coach. He's only doing that because he wanted to coach. Yes. He's not doing that to add to his resume or anything else. So I just thought it would be interesting to talk to one of his former players about that. But before we let you go here, I did want to pull back to the nickname conversation here, because we talked about that with Erik Kramer, and earlier when we were having the discussion with Dan about kind of the different tools in the tool belt, you said you wanted to be like Batman. I'm wondering if that nickname ever stuck. That would be a good one, and if you had any other ones.
Batman has never been a nickname for me. If you can imagine, they've all been something around the lines of kicking or my hair color. But
okay.
So one that I had was Golden Graham, one was Money Graham, Sugarfoot, Sugar Shayne, Shaniac.
Okay.
My mom called me Shayne the Pain. Still does. But I don't know. Like I feel like sometimes guys like to give themselves nicknames that are extremely complimentary, and I don't believe in that. Like I can never give myself a third person nickname, because when most people do it, it's the answer or something that's like a little narcissistic. So I've never ever played with what a nickname should be for me. So I've been happy to have some, and I've had Shank Graham, which is one you don't want.
No,
but I've had it. So you learn to brush some of them off, and some of them you hear people say it in public, and you kind of acknowledge it, and you keep going. But nicknames are funny because sometimes they're making fun of you, sometimes they're boosting you up, and sometimes they don't even make sense.
It's true, and it is true about picking your own nickname. That's why I wanted to put the Batman out there, because that might have to be your nickname going forward. I like that as a potential nickname because I selected it, not you here. And I'm not going to go with the puns. Yeah, there's too many kicking puns, too many. And Shayne, it's the same way with a name like Ryan. Anything that's easy to rhyme, and it's that becomes very
absolutely
very rudimentary. But we appreciate having you on. We got to let Shayne go. He's got some personal things to attend to, so I'll come back with Erik Schlitt. But appreciate you joining the show, and we'll look forward to having you back in next week here.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Shayne. We'll talk to him soon, and we'll talk to Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. I'm happy to bring on this next guest. I have to admit to him that Shayne just left, so that's probably the reason he joined the show. I've been trying to get him on my show for about a year and a half, and I wasn't able to do that, and then I suckered him in by the Shayne Graham title, and now Shayne just left. So my apologies to Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit, who was probably excited to talk to the former Pro Bowl kicker, but he's stuck with the former JV backup lineman from East Grand Rapids. So welcome to the show, Erik.
You got me when you came on our charity stream. That's really what it was. All due respect to Shayne, I came to talk to you, Ryan. I'm happy to be on and join you.
I appreciate it. That's I'm glad you highlighted that, because we did do a crossover with the Movember campaign, because it's a great thing that you guys do at Pride of Detroit, and I was happy to be part of it, honored to be a part of it, because I was the warm-up act for, I think, Lomas Brown or Herman Moore. There was somebody big follow me, so I'm sure they were like, well, who's this guy wearing a Jerry Ball jersey? And then they brought on the real the real headliners after me.
Yeah, it's a cool thing that we get a chance to do, and it's always nice whenever anybody gives us time.
Definitely, yeah, and we'll be doing more crossovers with you guys, especially if you do it again next year, and we'll be having as fans of the show know, we've had pretty much everybody from Pride of Detroit. I might have Erik help me get the couple people that we haven't had to feature them, but they're all great. We've had Ryan Matthews, Jeremy Reisman, Morgan Cannon. We had Al Karsten on recently. So I'm happy to get Erik on because he's got a wealth of knowledge about not only the Lions' history and he's been on the beat for a long time, but this is a good time to bring him on because there's a lot going on in the draft cycle. And since we have now a full-time football show where we can really dive into the offseason, this is the guy to talk to. So I'm curious. I saw you and Al had a good article about some standouts, some people to watch. So I'm curious. I think that was for the East-West Shrine game, but I'm sure you're going to do that for the Senior Bowl, and you're all on the beat of these different warm-up processes, including the combine and the lead up to the season. But I'm curious who you have your eye on as you kind of build out not only the draft and how that board's going to look for the Lions, but also who you know better than anybody who the Lions might have their eye on as far as the archetypes go. So I'm curious to highlight some of those people from the article and otherwise.
Yeah, we will. We're going to have another article on the Senior Bowl coming up. It should come out. We're aiming for Friday. If it leaks over into Saturday morning, it'll still be out plenty of time to read before the game on Saturday afternoon. But we've tried to find the type of guys that the Lions are looking at, right? Because there's going to be a lot of talented players at all these events that you were alluding to, and finding which ones fit the Lions scheme, it can be a bit of a challenge at times. And so we try to, eliminate some of the guesswork for some of the readers and point to some guys that either stylistically fit or physically match some of the stuff that the Lions have targeted in the past. And so we'll put up articles as we go. Like you pointed out, we did one ahead of the Shrine game. Al and I will have another one ahead of the Senior Bowl. We will do a position-by-position one leading up to the Combine, and then we'll do a results one after each day of the Combine as well, like one, how each position group performed and standouts that Lions fans should pay attention to. And then, you start building these collection of names and you're narrowing guys down, and you're slowly getting to work on your film. And, we got a little bit of a head start on it this year with the Lions not being in the playoffs. Usually we're scrambling quite a bit this time of year to try and get caught up with the draft stuff. But with a little bit of extra time, we've gotten a little bit of a jump on the game. And so, the way I work is I look at the positions that I'm projecting the Lions are most likely going to need from a long-term standpoint. Now, most analysts are going to look at the Lions and say, hey, this is what they need this year. But the way I try and look at it from a draft perspective is, who are they going to need in 26, 27, 28, right? Like, who are these guys that this is a position you need to solidify for multiple years? Because that's really how I believe Brad Holmes attacks it. And so those positions, I do think, line up with some of their needs in 2026, which are, like offensive tackle. They need to find a solution at center, and an edge rusher always seems to be a priority every offseason.
That's one of the things that I really like about your coverage, because I think fans sometimes have a hard time understanding, because fans like to fantasy book who they want for the team. They always want to go after the top guy of every position. They want to get Myles Garrett, and then they want to get Linderbaum at center, and those are reasonable ideas as far as, okay, you would want the best and the cream of the crop, but I always try to preach value. Okay, what are you getting for the value? Sure, it's great if you can get a Myles Garrett, but now you're going to have to pay him, and that's money that you could have allocated to somebody else, and you're under a budget, and that's how all of those things work. But the other part where I think they go a little awry is, I think you have to almost view this as an empath. You have to look at Brad Holmes and his history and what he looks for as far as the archetype at each position and some of the traits that they like. He's got the famous shirt of traits that he doesn't necessarily go after. Then he drafted Isaac Tisla, so I don't know about that, but they do have a lot of archetypes and things they go after. And I think that to truly understand a Lions offseason and a Lions draft, you have to put yourself in that mindset and say, hey, you might want a quick defensive end off the edge that's a sack king, but that's historically not who the Lions have gone after. Does it mean they'll never go after it? Not necessarily, but it just might lean you towards maybe like a Misador or a Falk in the first round rather than maybe some of the speed edge rushers that might work with other formats.
Yeah, like one of the best comparisons for that is there's a Texas A&M edge rusher, Cassius Howell. He's one of the best like pure burners off the edge. But he's only like 6'2", 250, which is light and shorter than typically what the Lions target. And then you add in the fact that he's not really as stout in setting the edge or against the run. And that is going to put him in a bucket that the Lions don't really have a position for, or at least not one that they're going to utilize a first-round pick on. Instead, like you said with the Misador, he's 6'3", 270. He can play the edge. He can play the 4-eye. He can play he can kick inside of the 3 on pass rushing downs. Like, he has a lot of positional range. You can stand him up if you needed to, just because he kind of has that range. And he's really good against the run. Now, you sacrifice a little bit of that edge rush pop, but it overall, what he is really successful at are things that the Lions prioritize. And so, if you're just generally looking at like draft boards, you're almost on all of them, you're going to see Cassius Howell ranked ahead of Misador. But for the Lions, they're going to flip that because of the stylistic advantages that the Miami edge rusher brings to the table. And you're going to see that a lot on the edge, right? There's a couple other guys that just aren't going to fit them from a stylistic standpoint, even though they might be ranked a lot higher on the just kind of consensus boards that you see published throughout the mock draft community.
Exactly, and that's I remember reading an article because I was actually at the college football playoff final, and so I was reading your preview as I was getting prepared for that because I'm an Indiana grad, so I was there representing them, and it was cool. I was there in the
Amazing.
Antoine Randall L days, so to kind of go back to that and think of his connection with the Lions. Obviously, he was a member of the coaching staff there and now on the Bears. But to think back to that era and think of where we got now, I couldn't resist the opportunity to go down there. But I enjoyed reading your preview because there's a lot of players on both teams, and you did a good job highlighting them. Misador is one of them. Obviously, Bain would be great. He's going to be graded pretty high in the draft. He's going to, by all likelihood, be gone by the Lions pick. But I know they're not necessarily in the market for an early corner, but D'Angelo Pons screams a Detroit Lion to me, but it was fun to watch it from that perspective. These guys may be going to the Lions and then just see that experience, because I was at the 16th loss of the Lions in Green Bay, and now I was at this first 16th win for my college team. So it was full circle for me.
I tell you, I have one jersey in my closet that is not a Lions jersey, and it's Antoine Randall. I absolutely loved him. When he joined the Lions coaching staff, I was over the moon to get to talk to him. I loved what he did. I'm very jealous to get to see that. I'm a Michigan grad, so but I wasn't in person at that national championship game for them. So I'm jealous. It must have been a great time.
Well, as is clear by this interview, you're obviously smarter than me. That's why you got into Michigan. I had to get into a party school that wasn't good at football at the time. Thankfully, we were pretty good at basketball at that time. But I wouldn't have traded those years watching Randall L. for anything. I mean, he was one of the most impressive players, and this is including Barry Sanders, seeing him when I was young. Other than Barry, I can't really think of a more impressive football player that I saw play live.
Yeah, he's super fun, right? And then you get to see him in the Super Bowl. Like he's in the Super Bowl with Pittsburgh here in Detroit. Like it's a lot of full circle connections there. It's pretty cool.
I was excited to have him. I don't blame Ben Johnson for taking him to the Bears, but I would have liked to have seen him ascend through the ranks of the coaching staff. But I'm glad we got there, because we got to take a break. But I want to talk about the offensive coaching staff and some of the changes and potentially more changes that could happen, because the fan base has been very bipolar about how they've dealt with this here, because we had one addition and then everybody was kind of on one side of things, and then another brought that back up here. So I want to talk about the new additions and possible additions in the future here, or reuniting of coaches and staffs here. So we'll come back with Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to come back here with Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit, having a good conversation with him about the Lions. And Dan and I were talking about it a little bit in the break, but it's just funny to me. We always preach patience on this show because we have a little bit longer arc on things. We don't necessarily like to go with the short term. We like to see the team building and all of those kinds of things. But when they hired Petzing, I was actually kind of low key a fan of the move, but I think you were on the same page with me on this from what I've read from some of your writing, that I was rooting for. I don't know who your kind of number one guy was, but I was rooting for Kafka for that position. And once it was just funny where everybody was kind of downing the Petzing hire. I think that was a little short-sighted. I think you got to look at the talent that he was managing and the situations he was managing in both gigs that he was in. But the same could be said for Kafka. I mean, that Lions game that we all saw firsthand, that he's doing trick plays where Jameis Winston is ending up in the end zone. I think there's something impressive about the level of talent compared to the level of execution and accomplishment for both of those guys. But to pull both of them, I really didn't think they would be able to draw Kafka with anything but an offensive coordinator role, because I talked about it on the show last week, but I mean, he was the interim head coach. That's often kind of a purgatory that we've established here historically in the NFL. But to get both of those guys, I think, is a big win for Campbell and co.
Yeah, absolutely. When I listed my ideal candidates for the Lions offense coordinator opening, it was Kafka at the top of the list there. He was one of the first guys I wrote about. I talked a lot about essentially what you kind of alluded to there, where his performance against the Lions and how he changed things when he took over for the Giants, how they played more inspiring ball, and how aggressive he was as a coach. And it's interesting, if you look at some of the aggression numbers, I think most people often associate Dan as being the most aggressive coach in the NFL. Last year he was second, and it was Kafka who was first, actually. So the connection between the two stylistically, I think, from a mentality standpoint, it aligns in a lot of ways. And I think you can say the same thing about Petzing. He wasn't quite on my radar because he was an offensive coordinator. So I didn't know if his contract was up, if he would have had to. He was still. I thought if he was still under contract with Arizona, the Lions would have to get permission, and then nothing got leaked out about him. So he kind of wasn't on my radar, just because it was a lateral move for him to go from one OC spot to another, and I think that was the case with a lot of people. Like, he just wasn't on their radar, and not a lot of people wrote about him because, you know, because it's difficult. You don't often see those lateral moves. And I really think he would have been more well received if people had that time. If it was leaked that he had, interviewed with the Lions, that Jared Goff was in meetings with him the weekend before he got hired. Like, those things, I think, would have resonated more with the fan base, and it would allow them time to process the idea of Petzing instead of it just being like thrust upon them and their initial gut reactions being a little bit more negative. So with the Kafka thing, though, he was a name that was out there. Like I said, the connection makes a lot of sense, and they'll find a role for him. Exactly what it is, I think, is still a little bit, to be determined. If I had to make an assumption, it's interesting that, David Shaw kind of came in with Morton, and so it would make sense that maybe he also exits with Morton. And if he does, that passing game coordinator role is open. At the same time, you also have Scotty Montgomery, who's interviewing for OC spots, and so maybe he's interested in the position, and so maybe then Kafka steps into his old role. There's a lot of different ways that they can go with how they utilize him, but I agree with you. Getting both coaches seems like a really massive win for Detroit. And stylistically, philosophically, I think they'll all mesh pretty well together based on what we know about them.
I've seen some reactions saying too many cooks in the kitchen and all of that. Yeah. I don't think that's the way. I think we've learned by this point that that's not the way that Campbell manages this team. He wants to be collaborative. He views it as a collaboration. And actually, Dan just showed me. Apparently, that was a Pride of Detroit article. I swear I didn't steal it from that, but it's a good reference. But no, it can be true. But I think it depends on your culture and your environment. That they're going to want to get input from everybody.
Yeah, certainly. The front office works the same way as in the coaching staff. They build in redundancy plans, and then they build in overlapping plans as well. So what you have is coaches who don't just coach their spot, but there's some overlap with another position. And then you have in the front office coaches or scouts that are scouting one area, but then they overlap with another area and they do like a cross check. And this is all designed so that if you do lose a coach or you do lose a member of the front office, that you have at least some people that are familiar with what the position is, and you should be able to maintain while you're looking for a replacement. And then two, you get to know other people's what jobs and roles, and it gives you perspective, and then additionally, it's also creating a broader picture of how to either develop a player or scout a player, because it gives you more perspectives on what the player can do. And so this redundancy and this cross check and this overlap that they have. This is something they've been doing for a while, and they have it set up in really like this hierarchy system of who reports to who, and so I don't buy the too many cooks in the kitchen either. I think the more brilliant minds you have is the better opportunity you're going to have to be successful.
Exactly. And that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I saw you reference this on X, but I think the natural conclusion to draw or theory to draw, question to draw from the fact that Tanner Engstrand was let go from the Jets staff. Obviously, the Lions were happy with him, likely wanted to retain him, and I know he was in the mix for that offensive coordinator job. I'm curious where you kind of see him going, because he's going to be, I think, for somebody that really didn't get much of a shot. I mean, we're talking about what Petzing and Kafka had to work with, and you made a great reference to the fact that Kafka really – he improved that team with a much lower amount of talent. He had already lost Dart, Scadaboo, Neighbors was long gone by that point in the season, and he's doing these things with Tracy and Winston and a bunch of backups, and Engstrand's situation that he was dealing with the Jets was arguably even worse than that. And so I'm curious where you see him going, because I do think that there's two teams at least in the NFC North that may put in a call there.
Yeah, like he's got a connection with the Lions, of course. There's also a connection with Ben Johnson. And the two of them have worked together in the past pretty closely in developing game plans in Detroit. And so both of those create natural spots for him, but he's also worked with Jim Harbaugh twice, once in Michigan, once at San Diego. And so he could easily probably call up his, Jim and be like, hey, you got a spot for me with the Chargers. And so I don't think he's going to be short on opportunities at all. For the Lions, though, I certainly do expect them to reach out to him and say, hey, we're trying to find ways to work. We're trying to, fill this spot. This spot might be opening. we're interested in retaining you if you're interested in coming back.
I know they were talking about possibly the tight ends role, and like you said, there's going to be some shifting here. I always assumed that Kafka would end up in Shaw's role too, because a lot of this is tough. We want to jump to conclusions, but there's a lot that has to go through the process. But we kind of covered the coaching side, covered the draft side. I want to know what your kind of plan is for the rest of the off season, as far as, obviously there's a big part of this that we want to address all of the things in the draft, because that's the thing that we can go on PFF and do the mock draft simulator and make a bunch of ridiculous picks right now, especially as people are undervalued. But I'm curious what you kind of see the goal being in free agency, because a lot of these positions you got to kind of probably pair the two. Like you talk about center being a whole. Do they get a veteran center and then bring in maybe a younger center in the draft, or develop McLaughlin? We don't know what's going to happen with Decker yet. So there's a lot of things that are still developing with that side of things too. But I'm curious what you see as free agency priorities here, because I think we got to temper expectations. I think they're going to be aggressive, but not in the way that people want them to be. Not necessarily spending a boatload on Linderbaum. It's going to be aggressive in bringing some new bodies in that they think will fit those archetypes in the system we're talking about.
Yeah, to be honest, the off-season work is, from this point on, it's going to work in 3 stages. The first stage is going to be getting your salary cap right, and then free agency, and then the draft after that. But it all starts with the salary cap and how much money you're going to have to set aside for your season, to set aside for your draft class, and then how much do you have left over to spend in free agency. And the Lions have really done a good job of leaving leftover money to roll over, which to the following season, which helps their future cap as well. So the salary cap is, I think, the most misunderstood portion of the offseason, but it's also the most important because it drives so many decisions on why maybe Linderbaum isn't as easy of an acquisition for the Lions to make because of the money that they need to allocate to other areas. So, right now where they sit, they're actually projected to have more money than what the cap allows, or more money spent than what the cap allows, but the cap's going to be adjusted. The Lions are going to have to make some contract renegotiations in order to free up some money, but they're not the only ones that are going to be doing this. All 4 NFC North teams are in that same spot. They're all projected to be over the amount available to spend. So all of the NFC North is in this kind of same boat. So Lions are going to go in. They're going to look at their salary caps. They're going to make their adjustments. The salary cap number will be set by the NFL. And then they're going to set aside a bunch of money for the future. And then they're going to say, all right, this is what we have to spend. This is what our needs are. And because Brad Holmes wants to go into the draft and not be put in a spot where he has to reach for a player where the value doesn't match the pick, he's going to want to try and fill every spot that they need with a starter-capable player. Now, it may not be like an elite player, but it's a guy who could probably give you starts if you needed to. And when you're looking at their roster right now, if let's say they don't re-sign anybody, which is a bit ridiculous because they'll re-sign about half of the guys that are available free agents. That's historically what they do. But if they don't re-sign anybody, they need to have a starter potentially at tackle, like you said, on the edge, at linebacker, and then a nickel. Those are your 4 spots. So those are the 4 areas. And then, obviously center could be an issue as well. But so if you look at those 5 spots, those are the 5 areas they're probably going to be looking at in free agency. And they're going to want to add somebody who can at least start. It doesn't have to be the all-pro like Linderbaum. It could just be like someone who could get them, to a spot where they need to be. And if they don't like the draft in certain areas, then that might be a position they're going to spend more on, right? So if they don't like the centers in this draft class, which I don't think they're great, I don't know if any of them are starter capable, but there's some developable guys, but that might going after a starting center might be high on their priority list. And then when it comes to tackle, do you want to spend the money on tackle? Some of these tackles in free agency have injury histories. And so do you want to spend that, or do you want to go to the draft where it's a little bit deeper and you might be able to find a guy on a cheaper salary for a longer period of time at a position of value? And so that's what they're going to be figuring out in that next month. They're going to be finalizing where they're going to attack, how they're going to attack it, where they need to spend their money, how much money they have. Like, all of those things play into a factor, all before we even get to the draft with those, with all those mock draft simulations that, I agree with you. They're a ton of fun to do, but they can be really misleading, and they can set expectations kind of out of whack a little bit as well. So, we'll find out a lot in the next couple of weeks with how the money gets settled, and then from there, they're going to start trying to re-sign their guys, and in free agency, if I'm kind of expecting them to focus, if they're going to get a center, I think that's a spot they might attack in free agency, and I would expect them to find, like I said, a starter-capable edge, a starter-capable linebacker, and maybe a starter-capable nickel.
That was a great summary. I've mentioned the salary cap thing on the show a lot. We're going to have actually a couple salary cap experts that are scheduled to come on in the next few weeks here to talk about that a little bit, because I try to remind people, hey, there's two sides to this with the whole spending thing. They just look at Holmes as being tight, but he's also planning for the future too, knowing that he's shelled out a decent amount of contracts that are going to inflate here for some of the homegrown talent. I think it was a great explanation of kind of the free agency goal to, as far as getting some players in that can kind of stem the tide, be holdovers while you continue to develop in-house, which is clearly something they like to do. And they've been decent at acquiring some free agents that weren't necessarily pegged for starting roles, but a guy like Rock Ya-Sin, it makes me think of this year. He wasn't necessarily, he wasn't somebody that people were chomping at the bit to get, but he was great. He ended up being a starter quality player, kind of to your point of that description. So they're going to look for a few guys like that, I think, here in the off season.
I agree. A guy like Rock is the perfect example. He's such a great system fit. You could see it in camp. He just fit in so well. And then when given the opportunity, he played great. If they're able to retain Rock, if they're able to bring back Avonte Maddox, their secondary is going to look a little bit. It's going to be stronger by trying to re-add those two players, and then focusing on that secondary becomes a little bit less pressing. And then I expect them to really, hone in on the trenches, on both sides of the ball.
I agree, and that's a great summary. Really appreciate you coming on and taking the time. We'll look forward to hopefully having you back on as this offseason progresses, because, like you said, it's going to have many iterations and it's going to change a lot. So we'd love to get your expertise back on the show here at some point. But be sure to tell people where they can follow you and Pride of Detroit in the meantime.
Oh yeah, I'm on most of the social media stuff. It's just my name. I have an unusual name, Erik with a K, Schlitt, Schlitt, and it's just everything is just at Erik Schlitt. So you can find me on most social medias like that. I'm constantly putting stuff out at Pride of Detroit. We also have Pride of Detroit on all the social medias. And, we try to use Pride of Detroit like an encyclopedia, right? An encyclopedia of what's happening in the Lions. So if you're ever wondering, like, hey, what does this move mean? How does this work? How does this go? Or what happened at this stage in week 10 of the Lions last season? We probably have an article for you on it, because we really try and touch on every topic as much as possible.
As we proved in this segment, because I was talking about the too many cooks in the kitchen thing, and Dan, my producer, turned around his phone and showed me a Pride of Detroit article on that. So it's like we're using Chat GPT here and just conjuring things. So, but really appreciate you joining the show, Erik, and we hope to have you back on again soon.
Yeah, of course. I had a lot of fun. It was nice talking to you. Time flew by.
Yeah, definitely. So, we'll have to do it again, and we'll be following Pride of Detroit in the meantime. So we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, Ryan.
Thanks, Erik. Thanks to our guests tonight. We had two Eriks with a K on the show, Erik Schlitt and Erik Kramer, and then Brett Gray in between. And thanks to Shayne Graham, too. He had to take off, but appreciate him joining us here, and he'll be back in studio next week. But we'll take a quick break and close up the show. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Want to thank Encore Business Group and the rest of our sponsors, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Just saw Sal today. He's out there working, so be sure to call him. He does a great job with pretty much anything you need for your home. So be sure to keep all those sponsors in mind. But good show this week here with the two Eriks and Brett. Appreciate Dan keeping me on track and feeding some nice articles, because he was on top of both the usage piece and that Cooks in the Kitchen article. So you're like an oracle, seeing what's happening before it happens at Jethro here.
But you're the one who said it without me telling you to say it, so I don't know. I think that makes you the oracle.
Well, I'm sorry to say this, Dan, but that means that we've spent a lot of time together and that we're connected. So that's a bad sign for you, I think, that we're that connected mentally here.
Well, without talking, we did go on vacation to the same place and met each other in the pool. And like, oh, you look familiar.
This is a true story. I literally ran into Dan in the Great Wolf Lodge Lazy River. Yeah. And I did not know he was going to be there. We spent a lot of time together. He's our most frequent producer here, and I literally ran into him there. So yeah, we just think alike now, Dan.
Yeah. Great minds or hive minds. I don't know which one it is.
I don't know if I can call mine a great mind, but I would go with that for you. But appreciate him keeping us on track. Mom joined us at the end here, and so we're rocking here in studio. But be sure to tune into the rest of the Jethro lineup. You've got the Sports Project 10 to 12 on Saturday, and then 7 to 9 on Wednesday. You got Sports Intel on Monday from 7 to 9. You've got all the other weekend stuff, Polka Pops during the afternoon on Saturday, and then Jeff Isaac's request show during the nighttime on Saturday. And then tune in to us next week from 7 to 9. Shayne will be back in studio for another great show. And until then, thanks for kicking it with us, and have a great week.